You've seen it before. Not once, not twice. Many times. Always on the same fence post, or the same branch of that oak near the corner of the yard. Always watching. Always staying just a little longer than the other birds do when you step outside. You've probably told yourself it's nothing. That birds look like they're watching because their eyes sit on the sides of their heads. That it's food, or territory, or coincidence. That you're projecting. But here's the thing. You might not be. Because scientists who study bird cognition have spent years documenting something that quietly rewrites the way most people think about the wildlife living around them. Many birds, common birds, backyard birds, the ones you see every morning, are capable of recognizing individual human faces. They remember specific people. They track behavior over time. And they form lasting judgments that shape how they respond to a person for months, sometimes years. That bird you keep noticing? It may have noticed you first, and it may have been watching a great deal longer than you realize. Today, we're going inside that reality. We're going to look at what the science actually says, what it means for the specific bird that keeps appearing in your yard, and why, by the time we're done, that simple, ordinary creature is going to feel like something else entirely. Stay with me. It starts small. So small most people dismiss it immediately. Maybe it's a crow that shows up every time you take the trash out. A robin that watches from the fence every morning when you walk to your car. A jay that lands in the same spot in the yard when you sit outside, closer than birds usually come, staying longer than it should. You notice it once and move on. You notice it again and think, is that the same bird? You notice it a third time and start to feel something shift, a low, quiet feeling that something about this is different. That feeling is worth paying attention to. The problem is that most people have been trained, reasonably, to assume that individual birds are interchangeable. That the robin you see today is not the same as the one from yesterday. That birds don't retain information about specific people. That their cognition simply doesn't work that way. Research says otherwise. The studies that changed this understanding didn't come from remote wilderness observations. They came from backyards, from college campuses, from ordinary neighborhoods, places where birds and humans share space every day. What researchers found in those ordinary places was anything but ordinary. The most well-known research into bird facial recognition began at the University of Washington, led by a scientist named John Marsloff. His research team wanted to understand whether crows, one of the most widely studied species for intelligence, could distinguish between specific human faces. The setup was simple. Researchers wore specific masks while trapping and banding wild crows, a stressful process for the birds. Later, those same mask-wearing faces were walked through areas where the crows lived. No trapping, no threat, just a walk through the neighborhood. The crows responded with alarm. They called out, dove toward the masked individuals, and followed them through their territory, behavior directed specifically at the mask that had been present during the stressful experience. Unmasked faces walking the same path. No reaction. The response persisted. Not for days. Not for weeks. For years. In follow-up studies, the team found that crow chicks who had never experienced the original trapping, birds born after the event, still responded with alarm to the dangerous mask. Not because they had been trapped, because older birds in the group had communicated that this face was a threat. The memory had spread. Now sit with that for a moment. Not just that a bird remembered a face for years, but that the information moved from one bird to another, to the next generation, through the social network of the flock, without a single word. Let's come back to your yard. That bird you keep seeing, whether it's a crow, a jay, a chickadee, or even a common house sparrow in the right conditions, has been spending time in your specific environment. It has a territory. It has a routine. And for some period of time, the human being who lives in that house has been a consistent presence within that territory. And it has been paying attention, not necessarily in the conscious, deliberate way a human might observe someone, but in the way a creature with a survival system finely tuned to detect patterns, movements, and inconsistencies would observe anything that appears in its environment regularly. Every time you step outside, it registers. Every time you move toward the birds versus away from them. Every time something loud or sudden happens near your door. Every time you put food out or don't. Every time you walk the same path at the same time, day after day, establishing a rhythm that a watching bird begins to anticipate. Birds are wired to notice patterns. More specifically, they are wired to notice deviations from patterns. A bird in a stable, predictable environment reads that environment as relatively safe. The same bird in an environment where a human moves unpredictably, creates sudden disturbances, or behaves inconsistently reads that environment as uncertain. That assessment doesn't just determine how far away the bird sits when you're outside. It determines how it talks about you when you're not. The crow research got most of the attention, and justifiably. It was rigorous, repeatable, and startling enough to pull the scientific community toward a serious reconsideration of bird cognition. But crows aren't alone in this. Mockingbirds have been studied for their ability to recognize individual people who approach their nests repeatedly and respond with escalating aggression specifically to those individuals while ignoring others walking the same path. The bird isn't responding to uniforms, height, or movement speed. It's responding to face. Pigeons have demonstrated the ability to distinguish between photographs of different humans in controlled laboratory settings, something researchers once assumed would require a level of visual processing well beyond what birds could achieve. Magpies, robins, and several corvid species have shown similar patterns across a range of research environments. The common thread is not species. It's the presence of consistent social exposure over time. When a bird interacts with a specific human or observes a specific human from a close enough distance, often enough, something gets encoded. A recognition profile, a behavioral prediction, a stored response. It's not memory in the human sense, but functionally, practically, it produces the same result. That bird knows your face. Once you understand the science, certain behaviors that seemed random start to reorganize around a new explanation. You've probably noticed that some birds in your yard are tamer than others. That one individual doesn't flush when you approach the feeder, while everything else flies. That a specific bird seems to watch you in a way that's attentive rather than fearful, head tilted, position held, eyes tracking. What looks like boldness or tameness is often something more specific. It's the result of a risk assessment that has been refined over many encounters. That bird has accumulated enough information about this particular human to conclude that close proximity is not a danger. The fearful flight response, which is physiologically expensive, simply doesn't activate in the same way. It has made a decision about you. And if it's a social species, crows, jays, starlings, sparrows, that decision and the calmer behavior that follows from it can become visible to other birds. When a trusted individual approaches and one bird remains calm, other birds monitor that response. A bird that doesn't flee when a human approaches is a signal. This one is known. This one is not a threat. The calm spreads. Here is where things get measurably strange in the best way. Bird alarm calls are not uniform. They're not simply "there is a threat" announcements. They carry information, encoded in structure, duration, intensity, and repetition, that other birds interpret with precision. And they change based on who is present. Researchers studying bird responses near human-occupied spaces have documented that alarm calls, those sharp, rapid vocalizations that send every bird in a yard to the nearest branch, occur with different frequency and intensity depending on the specific human who appears. A stranger entering a yard triggers a different response than the person who fills the feeder every morning. This is not a subtle difference. It's measurable. The rate of alarm calls drops. The distance at which birds take flight, what behavioralists call the flush distance, decreases. Birds return to foraging faster. Contact calls continue more steadily. The soundscape of the yard, taken as a whole, behaves differently when a known human is present versus an unknown one, which means the birds in your yard are not just recognizing you. They're broadcasting that recognition. Every time you step outside and the yard continues its activity without interruption, that is a kind of communication. It says something to every bird in that network about what kind of presence you are. This is the question that tends to sit with people once they understand what's actually happening. Not just that birds remember faces, but when did it start? How many encounters before the assessment was formed? How long has that bird on the fence post been building a profile? The honest answer from research is, it doesn't take very long. Crows have been shown to form stable recognition responses after as few as 2 to 3 exposures. Mockingbirds appear to lock in nest approach recognition within a single breeding season. In environments where humans and birds share daily routines, backyards, parks, gardens, Enough encounters to form a durable behavioral pattern can accumulate within weeks. Think about that against the timeline of your own backyard. Think about how many mornings you've stepped outside. How many times you filled a feeder or simply stood in the yard with a coffee. How many times that specific bird was somewhere nearby. The profile has been building for a long time. You didn't notice it was happening. It did. Here is what the research ultimately points toward, and what I think is the most quietly extraordinary part of this entire conversation. That bird in your yard has formed a judgment about you. Not a complicated moral judgment, not anything resembling human evaluation, but a stable, functional, behavioral assessment that shapes everything about how it responds in your presence and how it communicates your presence to others. It has placed you in one of a small number of categories that essentially determine your role in its environment. Unknown, predictable, safe, dangerous. And the category you've landed in, whatever it is the result of months of quiet, consistent observation that you were almost certainly never aware of. If you fill feeders reliably, move at an unhurried pace, avoid sudden aggressive movement, and maintain a fairly consistent presence and routine, there's a reasonable chance you've been classified somewhere in the range of predictable to safe. The birds in your yard return to feeders quickly when you appear. They don't flush at your normal movements. One particular bird may sit closer than the others because it has accumulated the most encounters and its assessment is the most refined. If your presence has historically involved loud disturbances, sudden movements, or inconsistency, feeders emptied and never refilled, dogs that charge the yard, startling exits through a back door, the assessment is different. The yard responds to you differently. The alarm network activates at lower thresholds. The silence when you step outside isn't calm. It's caution. Both of these are invisible to most people. They feel like background. They feel like just the way birds are. But they are specifically about you. There is something about this that is difficult to fully sit with, and I want to spend a moment in it rather than rushing past. For most of human history, the natural world has been something we observe. We watch birds. We study their behavior. We go out with binoculars or cameras and try to catch a glimpse of something that doesn't know we're looking. The research changes that framing. While you were watching or not watching, while you were just living your life and going in and out of your back door, there was something watching back. Not with curiosity in the way humans feel curiosity, but with a form of sustained, accumulating attention that produced real, lasting knowledge about you as an individual. That bird knows when you're likely to appear. It knows whether your appearance is associated with food, with danger, or with nothing in particular. It knows your silhouette well enough to distinguish you from other people who walk through the same space. It has shared some version of that information with other birds in its group. It is, in a meaningful sense, a witness. Not a dangerous one, not a threatening one, just an intelligent, attentive presence that has been quietly building a picture of who you are and what your presence means, and has been doing so with a consistency and patience that most humans would never apply to watching a bird step outside tomorrow morning. Same as always. But before you do anything, before you go to the feeder or check the garden or let the dog out, stop for just a moment at the door. Look for it. The one that holds its position when everything else moves. The one that tilts its head and watches. The one that's been on that branch or that wire or that fence post at roughly this time, more mornings than you've bothered to count. It's there. And now you know something you didn't know before. That the stillness you're looking at is not emptiness. It's attention. A specific, remembered, individually calibrated attention directed at you, of all the humans in all the yards in the neighborhood, because this bird has spent enough time with you to know the difference between you and everyone else. That's a strange and remarkable thing to hold. It doesn't change what you do in the morning. You still fill the feeder, still walk the same path, still go about your ordinary life in your ordinary yard. But maybe you glance up a little differently. Maybe the bird on the fence doesn't feel quite as accidental as it used to. Maybe the silence when you step outside, the way the yard just continues, undisturbed, starts to feel less like nothing and more like something. A kind of recognition, running both ways. Have you ever had a bird that kept coming back, that seemed to know you specifically, or showed up too consistently to feel random? Drop it in the comments. I'd genuinely like to hear what you saw.